Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe my channel. The air left my lungs so fast it hurt when Richard Holloway lifted a glossy photograph in my foyer and told the two police officers, in a voice meant for an audience, that I had broken into a sealed section of the property and stolen his surveillance equipment. Fresh paint still carried that sweet chemical smell in the entryway. The oak floors had been refinished 3 days earlier, and under the chandelier their surface looked almost wet. Cardboard boxes were stacked shoulder-high along the wall. A roll of packing paper had come loose and drifted across the tile like pale skin. Richard stood in the center of it all in a camel overcoat that still held the rein on the shoulders, his jaw locked, one hand raised with the photograph, the other braced on the silver head of his umbrella as if he owned the room by muscle memory alone. Behind him, Denise Carver, the realtor who had smiled her way through my closing, pressed 2 manicured fingers to the chain strap of her handbag and avoided looking directly at me. Linda Baines from the Briar Glen Homeowners Association held her pearl-colored phone against her chest with both hands, her mouth pinched into the same expression people wear at funerals when they are mostly interested in who else showed up. One of my movers had frozen halfway down the staircase with a lamp base in his arms. The younger police officer shifted his weight and glanced at the attic pull-down in the hall. The older one kept his notebook open and his face blank. Richard took 1 step forward and jabbed the photograph toward me. "She was up there," he snapped. "In the crawlspace. Tampering with a camera array that was never included in the sale. She accessed private files and removed equipment that belongs to me. My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 36. And this is the story of how I turned one forgotten camera in my new house into the evidence that destroyed the people who thought they could trap me inside my own home. I remember the exact texture of the moment because shock does that. It gives every object an edge. The cardboard cut into my peripheral vision. The brass umbrella stand beside the door reflected the blue flash of a patrol car through the leaded glass. A half-unpacked dish towel hung from a box in the kitchen behind me, striped cream and navy, absurdly domestic in a room that had just become a stage. Richard had called me less than 2 hours earlier. His number came up while I was on the floor of the breakfast nook unwrapping plates. He hadn't bothered with any pleasantries. "Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth in that overly careful way men use when they're already lying, "I forgot to disconnect the camera in the carriage house. You'll need to let my security guy in tonight. Not a sensor. Not a garage opener. Not a remote. Him." I sat very still with a stack of plates in my lap and looked toward the mudroom window, where rain was needling down the glass. "I'm sorry," I said evenly. "The what?" "The camera system," he said, impatient now. "It's part of an old internal setup. Nothing important. My guy just needs 10 minutes. If it's installed on my property," I said, "then it was important enough to disclose before closing." There had been a pause then. I could hear traffic through his car speakers. A turn signal clicking. Breathing. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," he said. "And you're telling me," I replied, "that there's active surveillance equipment in the house I bought from you." His exhale came through the phone hard and thin. "Don't go looking for things you don't understand." Then he hung up. Most people I think would have spent the next hour panicking. I made tea. That sounds colder than it was. The truth is, my hands were trembling when I filled the kettle. But fear had taught me something years earlier during the unraveling of a different life. Panic is useful to the person who caused it, not the person standing inside it. So I watched the steam gather under the kitchen lights, listened to the soft rattle of the burner and let my thoughts line up. Then I called Maya Serrano. Maya had been my friend since law school even though I never became a lawyer. I went into forensic compliance and corporate risk. She went into litigation with the appetite of a woman who enjoyed taking elegant things apart in public. By 38 she had her name on the glass at Serrano Cole LP and a reputation that made men in custom suits clear their throats before speaking. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you didn't buy a haunted house," she said. "Worse," I told her. "I think I bought a watched one." I gave her the short version. The call. The word camera. The omission from the disclosures. The way Richard sounded less concerned than entitled. Maya was quiet for 2 beats. "Do not let anyone into the house," she said. "Do not touch wiring if you can avoid it. Photograph everything. Check your router if the network was transferred." And Evelyn? Yes. If he used the phrase "forgot to disconnect," that means he thinks he still has rights over equipment inside a property he sold. People only say things that careless when they've been getting away with them for a while. I thanked her, hung up and walked into the utility closet off the mudroom. The router and network switch were mounted on a gray board beside the electrical panel. Neat. Professional. Labeled in small black print. Most of the tags were ordinary enough. Kitchen speakers, upstairs thermostat, garage door opener, sprinkler controller. But one switch fed into a second unmanaged hub tucked higher up behind the insulation panel, half hidden, no label at all. A bad concealment but confident. The sort of hiding spot used by someone who believed no one looking at it would know what they were seeing. I did. By the time the kettle had gone cold, I had identified 11 active devices on a segregated network and 4 dormant ones. 2 were obviously exterior. The others were not. One was in the sunroom beam. One was above the landing. One was inside the smoke detector outside the primary bedroom. One was in the attic access hall. And one, exactly as Richard had said, was in the carriage house. I didn't remove anything. I photographed MAC addresses, serials, switch lights, cable runs. Then I did something that probably saved me 6 months of procedural misery. I disconnected the uplink to the external cellular failover unit before touching the local admin console. Not enough to destroy data. Just enough to stop anyone outside the house from seeing what I was about to see. The login screen was still saved. Not because Richard was sloppy. Because he was arrogant. The admin username was R. Holloway. The password field auto-filled through the browser. And when I got in, the first thing I saw was a dashboard full of thumbnail tiles from rooms in my house, each with a timestamp in the upper corner. My stomach dropped like a stone through water. The footage didn't start with me. It started months earlier while Richard still owned the place. Denise in the kitchen with a legal pad. Owen Pike, his contractor, standing in the mudroom with dust on his boots and a coil of cable in his hands. Linda Baines in the dining room, pointing toward the front windows while Richard watched from the doorway with both hands in his pockets. There were folders too. Organized. Named. Exterior. Interior. Showings. Hoa. There are moments when a person's life divides so cleanly it almost makes a sound. Before I opened those files, Richard Holloway was a difficult seller with boundary issues. After I opened them, I understood I had purchased the stage set for something much uglier. I had just started copying the visible logs and a sample of the footage onto an encrypted drive when his second call came in. I let it ring out. 10 minutes later, he arrived with witnesses. Now he stood in my foyer pretending to be the wronged party. Officer Mercer. His badge said Ruiz. I remember that now, but at the time every detail felt oddly detached. Cleared his throat and looked at me. "Ma'am," he said, careful and formal, "Mr. Holloway claims there's property excluded from the sale that may have been accessed. We're here to keep the peace. Is there equipment in the attic that belongs to him?" Denise finally looked at me then. Her lips were glossy and bloodless under the foyer lights. "Evelyn, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. There was a supplemental fixtures clause. There was no disclosure of interior cameras," I said. Linda made a tiny disapproving sound in the back of her throat. "Let's not escalate." Richard turned toward the officers, not me, because humiliation works better with triangulation. "She's already escalated it," he snapped. "I have documented images of her entering a restricted area and tampering with a private surveillance archive." I took one slow breath. "Private," I repeated. "Yes," he said sharply. "In my house." Denise stepped in with that bright, practiced smile realtors use when they're trying to put varnish over rot. Technically, the carriage house and auxiliary security infrastructure were cellar-retained pending removal. "No," I said. "Technically they weren't." Richard's eyes flicked to me. Something in my tone had changed the temperature of the room by a degree. He recovered quickly. Men like him usually do. "You need to hand over whatever you took," he said. "Right now." The younger officer glanced between us. My mover on the stairs quietly set the lamp down. "I didn't take anything," I said. "I documented undisclosed surveillance devices installed throughout the property." Linda's shoulders straightened. "That is a very serious accusation." "So is trespass," Richard shot back. "And theft. And unlawful access." His voice kept getting louder. Mine didn't. That contrast mattered more than I can explain. Because panic invites people to interpret. Calm forces them to observe. I walked past the stack of boxes into the kitchen and picked up the mug I'd abandoned by the sink. It was white stoneware, still warm enough to hold heat in the base. I took a sip while they watched me. The silence stretched across the polished counters and stainless steel like a wire pulled tight. "Officer," I said at last, turning back toward them, "before this goes any further, I'd like you to note for your report that Mr. Holloway has just stated, in front of multiple witnesses, that he maintained access to live surveillance equipment inside a property he sold and transferred to me 41 hours ago." The older officer stopped writing. Richard's expression changed so quickly it was almost ugly to witness. Not anger first. Miscalculation. "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said," I replied. Denise shifted her handbag higher on her shoulder. Linda's phone lowered half an inch. Owen Pike appeared in the doorway behind them then, broad and red-cheeked from the weather, wiping rain from the back of his neck with one rough hand. He must have been waiting outside. When he saw the officers, he hesitated. When he saw me watching him, he smiled too late. "There he is," Richard said, seizing the moment. "Owen installed the system. He can verify what belongs to whom." Owen planted his boots on my entry tile and gave the room a quick appraisal. "It's a detached monitoring array," he said. "Temporary site equipment. Standard during major renovations." "Renovations that were completed before the listing went live," I said. He shrugged. "Sometimes gear stays longer." "In the smoke detector outside the primary bedroom?" That landed. A small silence. Dense. Immediate. Richard's jaw flexed. Owen looked at him, then back at me. "I don't know what you think you found." "I know exactly what I found." Denise tried to reclaim the room. "Evelyn, if there's been confusion over cellar fixtures, we can sort that out privately." I set my mug down on the kitchen island with care. "No," I said. "We're past privately." Richard took a step toward me. "You have no idea what you're doing." And that was the moment I knew he was afraid. Not because of the threat itself. Because of the pronoun. Not what you took. Not where's the equipment. What you're doing. He was no longer protecting hardware. He was trying to control narrative. I reached for my phone on the island and unlocked it. "If we're doing this in front of witnesses," I said, "then let's do it properly." Richard lifted a hand. "Do not." "Actually," I said quietly, and he stopped. I turned the screen toward the officers first, not the antagonists. Always the neutral party. Always the audience that mattered. "This is a screenshot from the admin console of the surveillance network installed in this house," I said. "Timestamped today at 4:12 p.m. These are active devices currently connected through a secondary hub hidden behind the insulation panel in the mudroom utility closet. There are 11 live endpoints and 4 dormant ones. 2 exterior. The rest interior." The younger officer leaned closer. I tapped the next image. Cable labels. Serial numbers. Device map. Then the next. A frame from the hallway camera. Me standing beneath the attic hatch. Timestamped 20 minutes earlier. Richard inhaled sharply. "That image," I said, "is one of the photographs Mr. Holloway printed and brought here to accuse me with. Which means he accessed the feed after closing." Denise went still. Completely still. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. Owen shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and stared at the floorboards. "That doesn't prove ownership," Richard said too quickly. "I told you it's retained equipment." I brought up the property disclosure packet from my email and enlarged the final signed version. "This is the executed seller disclosure. No retained surveillance equipment. No detached monitoring array. No carve-out for interior cameras. The only excluded items were the dining room chandelier, the greenhouse shelving, and the wine fridge in the carriage house." Denise's voice came out thin. There was an addendum. "Yes," I said. "Signed 8 days before closing. I have that too. It references landscape lighting and pool sensors. Not covert cameras in occupied rooms." Richard turned on her then, fast and vicious. "Denise." Her face tightened. "Don't." The older officer lifted a hand. "Hey. Everybody slow down." I was already moving more slowly than all of them. That was the point. I opened the call log on my phone and held it out. Mr. Holloway called me at 6:14 p.m. and stated, quote, "I forgot to disconnect the camera in the carriage house. You'll need to let my security guy in tonight." I didn't say. You did, I said. And if you'd like, I also have the voicemail you left 4 minutes later when I didn't answer the second call. I pressed play. His recorded voice filled the kitchen, flattened slightly by speaker compression but unmistakable. Evelyn, this is Richard. Don't go looking around in wiring closets. There's equipment in there you're not authorized to access. Call me back and let Owen in. Tonight. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the rain seemed quieter. The younger officer slowly looked up from my phone to Richard. Sir, he said, why would there be surveillance equipment in a sold residence that the buyer wasn't aware of? Richard's face had lost color along the mouth. This is being taken out of context. By whom? I asked. The router logs. He glared at me. You unlawfully accessed a private network. In my house. You had no authority. I had every authority, I said. Actually, what you were doing was illegal surveillance. His eyes narrowed. So I gave him the rest. I tapped into the device inventory and enlarged the labels one by one, moving at a pace so measured it felt almost ceremonial. Sunroom beam camera. Swipe. Hall landing camera. Swipe. Primary suite smoke detector camera. Swipe. Attic hall camera. Swipe. Carriage house loft camera. Swipe. Administrative uplink tied to a cellular backup registered to Holloway Urban Development. That last one cracked the room. One looked up too fast. Denise's hand flew to the base of her throat. Linda took one step backward and bumped the umbrella stand. Richard tried to speak and had to clear his throat first. That doesn't mean anything. It means, I said, this system wasn't forgotten. It was maintained. I switched to the access log. This entry is from last Tuesday at 11:42 p.m., after closing. Your credentials. Your device. Remote access session. 33 minutes. Another entry. Thursday morning. 8 minutes. Another. This afternoon. 17 minutes. Just before you drove over here with police. His lower lip had gone pale. Denise whispered, Richard, you said you shut it down. He rounded on her. Be quiet. That was revelation number 2. The third one I had saved because timing matters. I opened one of the archived clips. Not many. Just enough. The footage was from my kitchen 3 weeks before closing. The room looked different then, staged with a bowl of green apples and folded hand towels on the counter. Richard stood by the sink. Denise sat at the island with her legal pad. Owen leaned against the pantry door, muddy boots on the reclaimed oak. Linda Baines walked in a moment later, raincoat still on, and said, if she starts asking about attic access, I can have architectural compliance issue a notice. Nothing major. Just enough to slow her. On screen, Denise laughed once under her breath. Richard said, she won't. She's eager and she's alone. We just need the closing done before the sewer vote. Owen asked, and if she does find the carriage house unit? Richard smiled. Even on grainy footage it chilled me. Then we'll tell her it was forgotten. The younger officer actually took a half step back from the phone as if distance could help. Linda's face emptied like someone had opened a drain beneath it. That's edited, Richard said, but there was no force left in him. That's taken out of. That folder turned the whole thing from gross to surgical. Invoices. PDFs. Emails exported as .message files. Scans of annotated plats. Draft letters to the Municipal Utilities Board. A property valuation memo marked internal. Cable installation bills routed through Pike Restoration but paid by Holloway Urban Development. Denise's edits to the listing language. HOA violation templates. A consulting invoice tied to the pending sewer easement expansion that would, if approved, increase development access value for the southern lots by nearly $2 million. Richard had sold me a house while quietly arranging to profit from pressure points around it. He had also planned for resistance. One file, dated 3 weeks before closing, was labeled contingencies. Inside was a one-page memo. If buyer requests invasive secondary inspection, delay attic access pending historic insulation concerns. If buyer disputes after close, retrieve auxiliary monitoring hardware immediately. If buyer becomes adversarial, pursue tampering claim, demand return of proprietary security equipment. I read it twice, then once more. Maya read it, leaned back and gave a long, low whistle. He wrote himself a playbook, she said. Apparently. And then handed you the script. I thought of Richard standing in my foyer with a printed still in his hand. Certain the image made me look guilty when all it really did was prove he had continued watching the house after he no longer owned it. Some people are so used to structuring reality for other people that they forget evidence has no loyalty. We found more the next morning. The camera system's billing trail ran through Pike Restoration, but the admin account recovery emails routed to a Holloway urban development domain. The cellular backup plan used for off-site monitoring was tied to a corporate Amex ending in 4412. The same card paid for a private records search on municipal parcel changes related to the sewer vote. And buried in a folder named Insurance Miscellaneous, there it was. A vacant property rider. Richard had represented the house as functionally unoccupied during a period when he was staging showings, hosting contractor visits, and monitoring active interior footage. Maya set her pen down very carefully. Well, she said. That's one insurance fraud referral. Potentially more. I looked out the window over the sink. Morning light had finally broken through the rain, and it turned the wet bluestone on the patio the color of slate. Somewhere in the yard a sprinkler head clicked. He called it a forgotten camera. Maya gave me a thin smile. Men always minimize the thing that buries them. By Friday, Richard's attorney had responded. His name was Gerald Voss, senior partner at Whitcomb Vale, silver hair, expensive stationery, the kind of lawyer who billed in 6-minute increments and liked to imply civilization depended on his patience. His first letter was bluster wrapped in formality. Unauthorized access. Misappropriation of proprietary systems. Defamation risk. Demand for return of all copied materials. Maya laughed out loud when she read it in my dining room. Then she wrote back with exhibits. By Monday afternoon the tone had changed. Considerably. Settlement conference proposed. Private. No press. No regulators at this stage. Maya looked across the table at me. They're scared. Of criminal exposure? Of loss of control, she said. Criminal exposure comes after that. We agreed to the meeting for Thursday. In the 3 days between the story got bigger. Not publicly. Not yet. Structurally. One of the exported email addresses from Richard's archive belonged to Claire Holloway. I knew the name only vaguely from closing paperwork. Daughter. Emergency contact for the estate transfer file. 28, maybe 29. There had been one framed photograph in the library during my walkthrough, Richard with a young woman in graduation robes. Same last name. Same eyes around the corners. Different mouth. Claire had not been present in any of the camera clips I'd reviewed. But her email address appeared on several threads involving accounting approvals, vendor classifications and trust disbursements. She seemed to handle internal financial administration for at least part of his business empire. Not publicly. Quietly. Family business style. Maya sent her a preservation notice like everyone else. 2 hours later, Claire emailed back directly. Not to Gerald. Not to Richard. To Maya. Can we speak before Thursday? Alone. I was in my home office when Maya forwarded it. The room still smelled faintly of cedar from the built-in shelves. Afternoon light fell across the desk in long gold bars. I read Claire's message 3 times, then called Maya. Trap? I asked. Maybe, she said. Or fracture. I like fracture better. We met Claire the next morning in the lobby cafe of the Ashcroft Hotel downtown. She arrived 5 minutes early wearing a navy coat and no makeup. Dark hair pulled back so tightly it sharpened the fatigue in her face. She held a paper cup with both hands and scanned the room before sitting, the kind of movement people develop in houses where information is never just information. She looked first at Maya, then at me. You're not what I expected, she said. I had heard versions of that sentence my whole life. Sometimes it meant smaller. Sometimes colder. Sometimes less frightened. I'm not sure whether to thank you, I said. One corner of her mouth moved. That makes 2 of us. Claire did not waste time. I respected her immediately for that. My father told me the cameras were exterior security during renovation, she said. Then he told me they were temporary site monitors for vandalism concerns. Then on Tuesday night he called me and asked whether any invoices with Pike Restoration still referenced the carriage house. He was agitated. Because I found them, I said. Because you found enough, Claire corrected. Maya leaned forward slightly. Enough of what? Claire looked down at the cardboard sleeve around her coffee, then back up. He's been using that house as a leverage property for almost a year. HOA visibility, contractor routing, utility access, insurance positioning. But that's not why I'm here. She reached into her bag and slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were copies of internal ledger entries, trust allocations, and an ownership filing for a shell LLC I had never seen before, Bracken Holdings. Claire tapped one line with her index finger. He shifted 3 camera system invoices and the cellular monitoring plan into an LLC linked to a trust account in my name. Without telling me. Maya's brows went up a fraction. Claire swallowed. If this blows up, I'm the paper owner of at least part of the surveillance infrastructure. There was the way. Richard hadn't just betrayed buyers, neighbors, and regulators. He had planted his daughter in the blast radius. I looked at her for a long moment. Did you know about the interior devices? No, her answer came flat and immediate. I knew about perimeter equipment and archive retention. I did not know there were cameras inside bedrooms or hallways until your attorney attached those screenshots. And before you ask, yes, I believed him for too long. The honesty of that landed harder than any polished denial could have. Why help us? Maya asked. Claire gave a small, humorless laugh. Because last night I found a draft indemnity memo that would have assigned operational responsibility for the monitoring system to Bracken Holdings if there were ever litigation. Which means when he ran out of places to hide it, he planned to hide it in me. The cafe noise seemed to recede around us. She pulled out one last document. A printed email chain. Richard to Denise. Richard to Owen. Richard to Linda. And Claire copied on the forward summary, not the original planning, like a child being handed the minutes after the votes were taken. The subject line read contingencies, retrieval and buyer management. My fingers tightened on the edge of the table. Claire watched me see it. I'm not helping you because I'm noble, she said quietly. I'm helping you because he finally tried this on me. That was enough. More than enough. The Thursday conference took place at Serrano Cole's main office on the 21st floor of a limestone building downtown where everything looked expensive enough to absorb panic without reflecting it. The reception desk was smoked walnut. The waiting chairs were dark leather. Even the water glasses in the conference room were so thin they seemed made of tension. I arrived 10 minutes early with Maya and Daniel Cho, the forensic investigator she used when things needed both spreadsheets and subpoenas. Daniel was compact, unflappable, and precise in the way only former federal auditors can be. He carried 2 slim banker's boxes and a laptop case. Nothing about him invited theater, which made him ideal for rooms full of people who confuse volume with leverage. The conference room overlooked the river. Mid-morning light came hard off the glass buildings opposite and laid bright rectangles across the polished table. There were legal pads at every seat, capped pens lined in exact parallel, and a tray of coffee untouched near the credenza. I chose a chair on Maya's left and set my hands in my lap. Calm is easier when it has choreography. Richard arrived first on the other side, flanked by Gerald Voss and a younger associate who looked like he still believed expensive ties conveyed immunity. Richard wore charcoal this time, no overcoat, no umbrella, no audience. Without the theatrics of my foyer, he seemed older. Not weak. Men like him are rarely weak. But diminished, somehow, as if the edges of him had been sanded down in the days since his entrance failed. Denise came in next. Cream silk blouse, black trousers, hair immaculate, mouth strained. She sat 2 chairs away from Richard and did not look at him. Linda Baines arrived with separate counsel and a folder she kept opening and closing with restless fingers. Her pearls were smaller today. Her lipstick too bright. Owen Pike came last, smelling faintly of sawdust and menthol, with a criminal defense attorney whose expression suggested he had already advised silence and been ignored. Then Claire walked in. That was the first real fracture. Richard's head turned so sharply I heard the faint crack in his neck from across the table. Claire. She wore a slate blue suit and carried no bag, only a thin legal envelope. She did not sit beside him. She took the seat next to Daniel on our side of the table. Gerald Voss's face did not change, but the associate beside him stopped writing. Am I to understand, Gerald said slowly, that Miss Holloway is participating here adverse to her father? Claire folded her hands. You are to understand that I retained separate counsel yesterday. Richard leaned toward her, voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what you're doing. The irony hung in the room like smoke. Claire turned to him with a composure that looked practiced by necessity. Actually, she said, I do. Maya didn't let the moment sprawl. Good, she said crisply. Then let's begin. She stood, remote in hand, and the wall screen behind her flickered to life with a title slide so plain it was almost severe. Hart vs. Holloway et al. Chronology, Preservation Summary, Exposure Matrix. No flourish. Just structure. That, more than any dramatic accusation, seemed to unsettle them. Because it meant we had moved beyond outrage into architecture. Maya clicked once. A timeline appeared. March 3rd. Pike Restoration Invoice 1847. Installation of temporary monitoring infrastructure at 17 Hawthorne Lane. March 7th. Holloway Urban Development Reimbursement coded to site security. March 18th. Denise Carver edits fixture exclusion language in draft listing packet. April 2nd. HOA architectural compliance template created regarding attic access restrictions. April 7th. Linda Baines emails Richard, I can slow any supplemental inspection request if needed. April 29th. Vacant property insurance rider added to policy despite active showings and contractor access. May 12th. Municipal Utility Board circulates revised easement map affecting south boundary valuation. May 14th. Richard emails Denise, need clean close before vote. May 21st. Contingency memo drafted, retrieval and buyer management. June 2nd. Closing. June 4th. Remote login to interior surveillance network from Richard Holloway device. June 5th. Call to Evelyn Hart referencing forgotten camera. June 5th. False tampering accusation initiated at buyer residence with police present. Maya let the dates remain on screen for a few seconds. Long enough to stop being allegations and become sequence. Premeditation, she said not loudly. That is the organizing principle here. Not oversight. Not confusion. Not paperwork drift. A deliberate, multi-party plan. Gerald steepled his fingers. Counsel, if this is a bid for rhetorical pressure, I'd advise. Daniel slid the first exhibit packet across the table with the smooth efficiency of a car dealer. Exhibits 1 through 12, he said. Invoices, metadata, device registrations and policy records. Bates stamped. The younger associate beside Gerald visibly blanched at the stamps. There is a certain type of lawyer who doesn't understand danger until paper has numbers on it. Maya continued. Mr. Holloway represented the property as transferred free of undisclosed surveillance infrastructure while maintaining active remote access to interior devices after closing. Ms. Carver facilitated listing language crafted to obscure that infrastructure. Ms. Baines offered HOA process as a pressure tool to restrict inspection and manage buyer behavior. Mr. Pike installed and maintained the system through a contractor entity while billing portions through non-transparent channels. Owen barked a laugh with no humor in it. You're making it sound organized. Daniel looked at him. It was. That landed harder than a lecture would have. Maya clicked again. The next slide showed photographs of the hidden devices, each with placement, serial and network association. Smoke detector. Beam mount. Hall sensor. Loft camera. Utility closet hub. Linda stared at the smoke detector image and whispered, "Oh my God." Richard didn't move. Gerald tried another angle. Let's assume for the sake of discussion that certain monitoring equipment remained in place longer than intended. That does not automatically support the more theatrical inferences your client prefers. I finally spoke. No one needed theater, I said. You brought that to my foyer. His gaze shifted to me, appraising, perhaps reassessing for the first time in the clean light of a room where I was not outnumbered. Maya nodded to Daniel. He opened the second banker's box and removed a slim stack of binders. These are the access logs, he said. Remote sessions post-closing. Device identifiers tied to Mr. Holloway's phone, corporate laptop, and the cellular failover service. There are also view logs of archived clips labeled showings, HOA, and buyer notes. Denise's head jerked up. Buyer notes. Daniel passed another packet. Yes, he said. A subfolder containing short written summaries associated with specific showings and prospective purchasers. debt concerns, relationship status, negotiation thresholds, inspection sensitivity. She went white under her foundation. Richard looked at her, slow and lethal. What? Denise's voice cracked on the one syllable. I thought those were mine. Maya tilted her head. You thought the surveillance notes you created from covert footage were private. No, Denise said too quickly. No, I meant my showing impressions. I didn't know. You didn't know you were being preserved, Maya said. That was fracture number 2. Denise straightened in her chair, eyes bright now not with outrage but survival. He told me the cameras were legal because the house was staged and vacant. He said it was loss prevention. Richard's hand flattened on the table. Don't start this. She laughed once, sharp as broken glass. Start? Richard, you had cameras in the bedroom hallway. I didn't manage placement. Owen shot him a look of pure disbelief. Bull. Linda turned to Gerald. I want my own conversation with counsel. You have your own counsel, Maya said. And they should be advising you very seriously right now. Claire hadn't spoken in several minutes. She opened the legal envelope she'd brought and slid a single document toward Gerald. This is the indemnity draft my father never sent, she said. Dated Monday night. It assigns operational responsibility for Bracken Holdings to me if there is litigation arising from the surveillance infrastructure. Without my authorization. Richard actually flinched. Not visibly enough for a courtroom perhaps, but enough for a daughter across a table. Gerald read the document. The line between his brows deepened by a millimeter. Mr. Holloway, he said, and for the first time there was strain in his voice. Why does this exist? Richard's answer came too slowly. It was contingency planning. Claire gave a small, exhausted smile. That's what you called everything. Maya let that hang. Then she delivered the unexpected blade. Since we're discussing contingency, she said, there's one additional participant whose role needs to be clarified. She looked toward the side door. Daniel rose, opened it, and let in a woman I recognized only from a blurred image in Richard's library. Lila Holloway, Richard's ex-wife. Tall, silver-blonde, immaculate in a dove-gray coat, with the stillness of someone who had spent years conserving energy in a hostile environment. She took the empty chair nearest the far wall and set a leather folder on the table with both hands. Richard stared at her as if the room had tilted. Absolutely not. Lila didn't glance at him. You should stop saying things like that before people assume you still decide. Maya turned slightly toward the room. Mrs. Holloway provided historical context regarding the origin of the surveillance system and authenticated certain property access patterns. She also supplied photographs from the 2024 renovation showing the initial wiring routes before drywall closure. Richard's face went a strange color. You had no right. Lila looked at him then. Calmly. You put cameras in my guest suite 8 months before I filed for divorce. Even Owen went still at that. Lila continued, her voice level and almost soft. I didn't discover them until after I left. By then I understood exactly what kind of man I had been married to. When Ms. Hart's attorney contacted me, I chose not to let you do to another woman what you tried to normalize in your own home. There are silences that merely pause a room and silences that rearrange it. That one rearranged it. Richard's power had always depended on shared denial. Business partner. Realtor. HOA president. Contractor. Family. Each person holding some separate piece of rationalization. He's difficult but effective. He's controlling but brilliant. He's invasive but practical. He's ruthless but necessary. Lila's presence stripped that down to its frame. He was simply a man who watched people without their consent and called it management. Gerald removed his glasses and cleaned them, a tiny gesture that told me he was buying himself time. Maya moved to the final section. Here is the exposure landscape if this proceeds beyond settlement today, she said. Civil claims. Fraud, fraudulent concealment, invasion of privacy, trespass to chattels, intentional infliction, conspiracy, unfair trade practices. Regulatory referrals. Real Estate Licensing Board, Insurance Fraud Bureau, Municipal Ethics Inquiry, Contractor Licensing Division, HOA Governance Review. Potential criminal referrals, jurisdiction dependent. Unlawful surveillance, insurance fraud, evidence tampering, false report. Linda made a small choking sound. Owen muttered, This is insane. No, Daniel said. It's documented. Maya placed both palms lightly on the table. Our client's current demand is straightforward. Full transfer of all surveillance archives, credentials and hardware provenance. Written admission of non-disclosure and unauthorized post-closing access. Payment of damages, remediation costs and legal fees. Immediate resignation of Ms. Baines from any HOA enforcement role pending review. Cooperation affidavits from Mr. Pike and Ms. Carver concerning installation, disclosure drafting and post-closing retrieval planning. Preservation of all remaining devices, communications and financial records. If these conditions are met, our client will consider resolving the civil matter privately while reserving her right to respond truthfully to any regulator who asks questions. Gerald lifted his head. And if they are not met? Maya's expression didn't change. Then by 5 o'clock tomorrow, every regulator I just named will receive a packet. Along with the incident report from June 5th, the footage of the buyer management discussion, and a referral memorandum already drafted for the district attorney's intake unit. Richard slammed his hand against the table. This is extortion. The crack echoed off the glass. Maya didn't blink. No. Extortion is when you use leverage you have no right to possess. We're using evidence your client left in her walls. He turned to me then, abandoning counsel, abandoning strategy, reverting at last to the primitive thing underneath. You think you've won. I met his eyes across the polished wood. I said quietly, you're finally being watched by people you can't manipulate. Denise started talking before anyone invited her. It was Richard's language, she said too fast. The fixture edits. The delayed addendum. He told me to keep the security references vague because buyers get spooked by technical clutter. I never installed anything. I never logged into a live feed. I wrote notes after showings, yes, but I thought the property was vacant. Owen laughed harshly. You were in the house when I mounted the hallway unit. Denise wheeled on him. You said it was motion analysis. It was motion analysis, he shot back. For him. Linda looked between them with rising horror. You told me the HOA clips were from exterior coverage. Richard snapped. Will all of you shut up? Claire spoke then, finally turning to him fully. That's the problem, she said. We did. No one moved for a few seconds. Then Gerald leaned toward Richard and said something too low for the rest of us to hear. Richard listened without expression, but I saw the muscle in his cheek jump once, twice. On the far side of the table, Linda's attorney was already whispering to her urgently. Owen's counsel had his hand over a yellow pad, circling one word again and again. Denise sat with her spine rigid and her eyes unfocused, as if she had suddenly seen the long drop beneath the floorboards she had been crossing for months. Maya slid the settlement draft across. Take 20 minutes, she said. Use them wisely. They broke into corners. Glass wall. Leather chairs. Murmured panic. Richard and Gerald near the window, Richard gesturing hard, Gerald barely reacting. Denise crying quietly into a tissue she seemed angry to need. Linda on her phone with someone from the HOA board hissing, do not email anything, do you understand me, nothing. Owen staring at the carpet while his attorney spoke directly into his ear. Claire seated near the credenza, very straight-backed, not looking at anyone. Lila beside her, not touching her, but close enough that the space between them felt intentional. I stood at the river-facing window with Maya. Tugboats moved below like dark beetles on silver water. The city seemed indecently ordinary. Linda, after nearly fainting when Maya mentioned subpoenaed board communications, agreed to resign immediately from enforcement functions and provide written acknowledgement that HOA processes had been discussed for inspection delay leverage. Richard resisted longest. Of course he did. He objected to the admission language. The damages amount. The legal fees. The archive transfer. The preservation clause. Claire's carve-out. Lila's participation. My presence. Gravity. Sunlight. Reality. At one point he actually said, this entire house was my vision. I looked at him over the agreement pages. That was your mistake, I said. You kept forgetting it was also made of walls. The final impasse came over the written statement. Maya wanted a plain sentence. Seller failed to disclose active interior surveillance devices and accessed the system after closing. Gerald tried to massage it into passive voice and ambiguity. Oversight. Legacy infrastructure. Unintentional continuity. I waited until they had exhausted themselves. Then I leaned forward and asked Richard a question in the same tone I might have used discussing weather. Do you remember what you said to Owen in the kitchen 3 weeks before closing? His eyes cut to me. I answered for him. You said, if she finds the carriage house unit, we'll tell her it was forgotten. No one at the table moved. I held his gaze. I made sure you'd find exactly what I wanted you to find in my house that night, I said. The visible devices. The access logs. The clips with all of you in the room. Because I wanted you to come in loud. I wanted you to say everything on the record. I wanted you to see them. He stared at me as if I had stepped outside some script he still believed governed the world. Maya slid the page back toward him. Sign. He looked at Gerald. Gerald looked tired now and older than when we began. Richard, he said quietly, if you do not sign, I cannot protect you from what happens next. That word again. Protect. Richard had spent so long confusing protection with ownership that I don't think he recognized the difference until it was too late. He signed first with a Mont Blanc pen he brought from his inside pocket. Denise signed with shaking fingers. Owen's signature gouged the page. Linda had to ask for water before she could manage hers. Claire signed only where necessary to disclaim unauthorized ownership and preserve her independent claims. Lila did not sign anything. She didn't need to. Her role was not to bargain. It was to confirm the room's memory. When the papers were stacked, initialed and collected, the silence felt lighter. Not kind. Just final. Richard stood abruptly, chair pushing back with a hard scrape against the floor. This isn't over, he said. I rose too, though slowly. He wanted one last scene. One last chance to leave a bruise in the air. I didn't give him that. Instead, I gathered my folder, slid my pen into its spine, and said the most devastating true thing I had for him. You were right about one thing, Richard. A house does remember. It just didn't remember you the way you expected. Then I walked out first. 6 months later, the first thing I noticed most mornings was the light. The sunroom faced east, and in October the early light came in low and honey-colored, laying itself over the warm wood floor, the linen curtains, the arms of the reading chair I'd moved there after the last of the legal debris cleared. I used to wake with my jaw tight. By then I woke to the smell of coffee and the soft hiss of the radiator under the windows. Fresh starts are rarely dramatic in real life. They are usually small and repetitive. Clean counters. Quiet mornings. The pleasure of knowing exactly who has access to your front door. I had the house professionally swept twice, rewired once, and repainted 3 rooms for no reason except that I wanted color chosen by someone who loved the place more than they wanted to control it. The guest room became an office. The carriage house loft became a studio with long shelves and a drafting table. The utility closet no longer held secrets. Just cables labeled honestly. The karmic aftermath arrived in installments, and I would be lying if I said I didn't appreciate the pacing. Richard went first. Holloway Urban Development announced his temporary leave 3 weeks after the settlement. By the following month, the insurer had opened a formal investigation into the vacant property rider and related claims. The Municipal Utility Board, having received its own packet through channels that had absolutely nothing to do with me and everything to do with mandatory reporting, delayed consideration of parcels connected to his access proposal. A local business journal ran a small item about internal restructuring after governance concerns. He hated small items most of all. They made him look ordinary. Denise lost her brokerage affiliation before she lost her license.